worldviews can coexist without violence. I realize that this sounds a little naive, but when I look at a city like Antwerp, I immediately see that this is the only way forward. In Antwerp, we have citizens living from 174 different countries. We are the most diverse city in the world after Amsterdam, but before New York and London. And because we do not all share the same opinions, insights, ideologies or objectives, living together is not always easy. Sometimes there are frictions and sometimes there are conflicts. But nevertheless, Antwerp wants to be a city where everyone can be himself or herself regardless of color, origin, race, sexual orientation, political opinion, religion or whatever. As a mayor, I strive for a strong urban community that surpasses all these differences, so that what unites us becomes more important than what divides us. The International Peace Meeting, Peace is the Future, is of particular importance for our city, because Antwerp itself is a unique laboratory for the coexistence of different groups, inspirations and backgrounds. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish the community of Sant'Egidio a successful organization and all participants an inspiring conference, full of meaningful and engaging conversations and meetings with people from all over the world. Afterwards, I hope you will think back with pleasure to those 3 days you spent here in Antwerp. I hope that you will return home with positive feelings and that one day, somewhere in the future, to our city. Be sure we will receive you then as good old friends. Thank you very much.
Holiness, Beatitude, Eminencies, I am pleased, dear friends, I am pleased to give the floor now to Johan Bonny, Bishop of Antwerp, and I thank him again for his invitation to bring the spirit of Assisi to our beautiful city.
Dear friends, last week, at the beginning of last week, someone put this postcard, this paper in my mailbox. It is what we had prepared for this international meeting 100 years after Religions and Cultures in Dialogue, 100 years after the First World War. Behind the title of this meeting, Peace is the Future, they had put a very large red question mark. And so it read, is peace our future? Last year and last summer, many conflicts follow one another, especially in Eastern Europe and Middle East. And it was a long... we had not seen for a long time so many cities destroyed, militaries dead, civilians dead, and 2 journalists who had been beheaded. We are all concerned about what is the end of peace in the next future. Many participants that had asked to be part of this meeting canceled their registration because they didn't want to leave their countries in difficult situation. We are close to them in our thought, in our prayer. President of the European Council, Governor of the province of Antwerpen, Mayor of Antwerp, representatives of civilian authorities, representatives of religions, Professor Riccardi, and members of the community of Sant'Egidio, my dear friends who participate to this international meeting. I want to welcome you all here in Antwerp. Many of you contribute there where they live to a more peaceful society. In the next year, many of you will begin to talk. May your talks, may your dialogue, the fact that your dialogue is important for our city is important for our city, but it is also important for our diocese, and we too are Christian communities and the other religions who are gathered here, who live here. We do want to build a more peaceful society for all men and women, not only those who are far away from us, but near us here in our city. I thank the community of Sant'Egidio for having organized this event in our city, and I thank the authorities who were able to support to this meeting and made it possible. In the name of the Diocese of Antwerp, I greet you all, and I wish all of you 3 days full of sun, but of depth. I hope that after this 3 days we can substitute the red question mark on this paper in an exclamation mark, green exclamation mark. We want peace, needs to have the last word. We want peace.
Thank you very much. And I'm very glad to announce now the message that His Holiness Pope Francis addressed to our encounter.
To the Most Reverend Johann Joseph Bonny, Bishop of Antwerp, I ask you kindly to convey my warm greetings and cordial good wishes to the representatives of Christian churches and ecclesial communities, and to the many leaders of the world religions assembled in Antwerp from the 7th to the 9th of September 2014 for the International Peace Meeting. I thank the Diocese of Antwerp and the community of Sant'Egidio for organizing this gathering in which men and women of different religious traditions come together on a pilgrimage of prayer and dialogue inspired by the spirit of Assisi. The theme of this year's meeting, Peace is the Future, recalls the tragic outbreak of the First World War 100 years ago, while evoking a future in which mutual respect, dialogue and cooperation will help to banish the grim spectre of armed conflict. In these days, when not a few people in our world need to be helped to find the way to peace, this anniversary can teach us that war is never a satisfactory means of redressing justice and achieving balanced solutions to political and social discord. All war is ultimately, as Pope Benedict XV stated in 1917, a senseless slaughter. War drags peoples into a spiral of violence, which then proves difficult to control. It tears down what generations have labored to build up, and it sets the scene for even greater injustices and conflicts. When we think of the countless conflicts and wars, declared and undeclared, which presently afflict our human family, blighting the lives of young and old alike, poisoning age-old relationships of coexistence between different ethnic and religious groups, and forcing families and entire communities into exile, it is evident that together with men and women of goodwill everywhere, we cannot remain passive in the face of so much suffering, so many senseless slaughters. It is here that our various religious traditions can, in the spirit of Assisi, make a specific contribution to peace. We can do this through the power of prayer. All of us have come to realize that prayer and dialogue are profoundly interrelated and mutually enriching. It is my hope that these days of prayer and dialogue will serve as a powerful reminder that the pursuit of peace and understanding through prayer can forge lasting bonds of unity and prevail over the passions of war. War is never a necessity, nor is it inevitable. Another way can always be found, the way of dialogue, encounter, and the sincere search for truth. The time has come for religious leaders to cooperate more effectively in the work of healing wounds, resolving conflicts, and pursuing peace. Peace is the sure sign of a commitment to the cause of God. Religious leaders are called to be men and women of peace. They are capable of fostering the culture of encounter and peace when other options fail or falter. We must be peacemakers, and our communities must be schools of respect and dialogue with those of other ethnic or religious groups, places where we learn to overcome tensions, foster just and peaceful relations between people and social groups, and build a better future for coming generations. With these sentiments, I invoke upon all taking part in the meeting and all who sustain them by the support of their prayers, the abundant blessings of the God of peace. From the Vatican, 26th of August 2014, Francis.
Santità, beatitudine.
Holiness, beatitude, excellencies, dear friends. Now we gladly listen to the words of Professor Andrea Riccardi, founder of the community of Sant'Egidio. And we all thank him for having had the vision of being able to understand the power that came from the historical meeting of Assisi in 1986, and for having created this movement of men and women, of friends of peace, that has brought and will bring fruits of peace and reconciliation in the whole world. Thank you. Peace is the future. In these moments, the title of our Congress seems no more than a wish. Peace is not the reality today. Neither does it seem to be the future, because war has returned. It has returned in Europe between Russia and Ukraine. In the architecture of Middle East has failed in 2 years while persecuted refugees fleeing from northern Iraq. We are going to listen to a voice that speaks about all these things, and I take the chance of greetings Patriarch Sacco, who has lived for a long time in northern Iraq and now lives the tragedy of a people of refugees. Syria is prey to a devastating and inhuman war. Sorrowful stories which germinate also from the re-legitimization of the war as a tool, as well as the mixture between religion and violence. Normally, there is a worsening of the very condition of war as they're provided by the Geneva Convention on the Treatment of Prisoners and Wounded, as well as the humanitarian law. War are increasingly more inhuman. We see it in the exhibition of the act of cruelty, which used to be covered up by those who committed them in the past, and now, in this global era, are used as a weapon to slaughter and to exhibit the horror. Women, men, humiliated, driven out of their homes, naked, killed by gunshot or even worse. Children were killed. Journalists. This is true terrorism. It is the worship of violence that terrorizes and conquers. Peace, indeed, does not seem to be the future. Neither it seems in the major cities, especially in the suburbs where the widespread violence of mafias and crime rules as if it was a civil war. In many countries of the world, I'm thinking of some African countries, the state has not protected citizens who end up in the violent hands of criminal or pseudo-religious groups. We were speaking about it with Cardinal Onayekan, whom I greet as I greet all the guests from Nigeria. I do not conjure these visions to make fear grow. The global world, Professor Bauman authoritatively explained it to us, is a land of many fears. Professor Bauman, he also noted how our generation, though it is gifted with the best technology, is the one that experiences more insecurity and fear. Contemporary men and women feel isolated at the mercy of powers that can attack them from afar. They live what the scholar of religious Mircea Eliade used to call the fear of history. Citizens, whether alone or associated, feel incapable of making history and does not even try to do it. They are powerful. Politics has lost all power. Fear is then not only a feeling, it becomes sometimes contempt for the other who is a different religion or different ethnic group. The culture of contempt is as ancient as human history, but in this time of globalization, its revival is stunning. Fear generates violence. At times, violence is smuggled as preventive in the face of the other's proposed aggressiveness. My dear friends, we question ourselves our peace and future on these days. We are doing it in Belgium in 100 years from the beginning of the First World War, when this little neutral country was overcome by a conflict born far away from here, showing that war spreads like a contagion in an environment that is already saturated with tension, and turning a European war into a global war. And here I wish to grasp the opportunity to thank our Belgian friends and the authorities of their hospitality, and express my thanks to those who offered their voluntary help for the realization of their meeting. Thank you to all of you. One very special thought goes with great affection to the Bishop of Antwerpen, my dear friend, Monsignor Bonny, with whom we have realized this event, and a thought to the community of Sant'Egidio of Belgium. Pope Francis, a few weeks ago, spoke of contemporary conflicts almost as a third world war, but he said in pieces, in chapters. Against this background, we ask ourselves, is peace our future? Who are we? We come from far. Allow me to recall our path from the first great meeting among religion in Assisi, the city of St. Francis, summoned in 1986 by John Paul II, at the time of the Cold War. We called it the path in the spirit of Assisi. Back then, the great Pope John Paul II said, and I quote, more perhaps than ever before in the history, the intrinsic link between an authentic religious attitude and the great good of peace has become evident to all. End of quote. Religion and peace interpenetrate each other. It was necessary to remove all religious foundation from war and violence, denying religious war all excuses. We continued since 1986, year after year, gathering together women and men of religion, humanists, to work on the delicate border, frontier, front line between war and peace. We have done never war is holy, but only peace is holy. We had watched on the front line between war and religion, because dangerous mixes are created, as it was at the end of the 20th century, at the beginning of the 21st, when an interpretation of conflict as war of religion and civilization took root. It was a tremendous simplification facing the complexity of the global world. Simplification that was handy for whoever was seeking for an enemy and did not want to make the effort of understanding the other, as well a simplification as well for those who wanted to wage war or stand up as an enemy to others or to the world. Wars of religion. Frightened men and women reassured one another, finding an enemy to find. Power-thirsty men and women seek a blessing and legitimization in religion. Along a path that set off in Assisi years after year in 86, we have clarified that peace is much too serious to make it the business of few. Back then, John Paul II said, peace is a workshop open to all, and not just to specialists, to the wise ones and strategists. End of quote. From here comes this movement of peace and dialogue, a movement which has been through, it has involved humanists and people of belief and people of faith. Unfailingly, we were confronted with the objection concerning the conflicts underway, the objection of what is the use of your dialogue, but what would the world be without dialogue? Visiting the community of Sant'Egidio a few months ago, Pope Francis said, the world suffocates without dialogue. I would add, what does prayer achieve? The dialogue between religion and cultures is the answer to live together in worlds that are more and more complex and multifaceted. It is a daily practice, a culture that turns into a proposal. War always leaves the world worse than they found it. If we look back to the past 2 decades, we see that the words on the new global world left a poisoned heritage. I'm not saying it out of pacifism, but by a historical awareness of what has happened. Refusal of war, the war leaves the world worse than they found it, because the war destroy man, women, countries, human life. Refusal of war does not originate from generic pacifism, but from the will to be peacemakers, emphasizing, therefore, then the path of dialogue. Yet, facing conflicts, institutional bodies that are in charge for dialogue appear to be worn out, while the culture of practice and dialogue appear to be devaluated to a mere political correctness, to a scheme lacking passion. They are denigrated by the machismo of those who are re-legitimizing war and violence. Religions hold a crucial responsibility. In our world, frightened by the economic crisis, in this world we need the breath that may reanimate hope, that may drive back hope to humanity, to awareness of a common destiny, because religions say that men and women actually undertake the same journey and they have a common faith. That this is a basic consciousness, as simple as bread and as needed as water. A common shared future destiny in diversity. An anthropologist, Germain Tillon, who was imprisoned in a Nazi lager. All relatives, all different. We are all relatives. But this basic awareness is sometimes lost in the tangle of hatred, vested interest, prevention of culture, fanaticism. We need to revive the workshops of unity, especially by encouraging a simple, essential, uniting drive. All relatives, religions, and cultures can revive this simple and basic awareness. Be simple with intelligence, used to teach the great John Chrysostomus. Simple with intelligence. My thought goes to two men of dialogue and religion, who are beloved friends of ours, two Christian bishops, Mar Gregorius Ibrahim and Paul Yazigi. Together with them, Paolo Dall'Oglio, were held captive for more than a year in Syria. We have no more news of their fate, and I wish to greet them and remember them. And I want to greet among us Patriarch Ephraim of the Syrian Orthodox Church, the head of the Syrian Orthodox Church. Gregorius are a people of believers, poor and defenseless, who over generations have preserved their peace without weapons. Welcome, Your Holiness. Unfortunately, at times, religions feel attracted by the worship of violence, by fanaticism that is inhuman. Religions should not have to go back to their profound energy of peace. And this happens in meeting, in generosity, in cultivating the spiritual dimension of friendship. The strength of this path of the Spirit of Assisi confirms solemnly that no war of violence that can be waged in the name of God. We say it within our own religious tradition, alerting that violence in the name of God is blasphemy. All religious traditions tell us of a patient, merciful, slow to anger, compassionate God. We need, in these days, difficult times, to find the audacity of remembering that peace is the name of God, and finding each and meeting together in this anniversary of the First World War in front of the scenarios of our time makes us empowers us to strongly claim that peace is the name of God. This means to look for peace in our countries. Every religious leader, every believer, beyond their own community, is called to be man and woman of peace. This demands the development of a passion for peace. It asks the growth, it is the growth of a power for peace, able to create new ideas, restoring places of encountering, and defying the fates of war. My dear friends, I greet you all with great joy, but I also feel that this meeting is not only a beautiful meeting, but it is also a need of our time. 30 years passed from 1986, when our path began. Some of us, of course, are becoming old. But our conviction has not faded. On the contrary, it was strengthened. The conviction that war is the great foolishness and that dialogue is the cure for all conflicts. And more than ever, more than before, much more than before, we are today convinced that that peace is a cause that can inspire policies as well as choices and existences. Yes, peace is an ideal that is trampled upon in many parts of the world, but it must rise again. Peace is the supreme ideal for tired societies that are tired and lacking a cause. Our ideal is that peace is the future.
Grazie. To give the floor to Professor Zygmunt Bauman, one of Europe's best-known intellectuals, who long before others understood the fluid character of today's society. Professor, it is a pleasure and an honor to have you in our midst, and I thank you for being with us during these days.
Thank you, Hilda Kibom, and in fact to every speaker who spoke before me. They said everything which is important about the topic which brought us together here, and I just wonder what can I add to it in these 15 minutes which were assigned to me. I would like to quote, actually, start from quoting from the homily which Monsignor Johann Boni gave earlier today, and I think which put in the nutshell the reason why we are here in this room. He said, the first and most beautiful fruit of the tree of life is the one of reconciliation and peace. I agree completely with that, but I would like to add to that the next sentence. The trouble is that so many people in the world somehow refuse to eat that fruit from the tree of life. And I want to dedicate 15 minutes to asking the question why it is so. What is just handicapping them, making unable to taste the sweet taste of the fruit of tree of life. Well, I would like to start from reminding you that one of the first interviews, public interviews for public press, which Pope Francis gave immediately after being elected, the first interview was given to Eugenio Scalfari, the Dean of Italian Press, but also declared atheist, and with the intention of being published in the daily La Repubblica, which also is not particularly notorious for supporting the church. Now, I think there was a very powerful message in what Pope Francis did. The message, to put it in a nutshell, was that dialogue is not a series of monologues when the speakers speak past each other rather than to each other. That I would add to that being the most important art which we need to learn if we want to preserve peace on the planet, it is also the hardest of human arts. Why it is hardest? It is hardest because it demands the readiness to converse with an adversary. Not only the ones who already agree and carry the views which you cherish, but also the carriers of views you detest. And that is why it is so difficult art to master, because, let us be absolutely clear about it, it is against human nature. Humans are not like to be contradicted. They want to self-assert their beliefs, their views, and they are not very kind to people who contradict them. Now, Pope Francis, that was not just one act of Pope Francis, uncommon and uncharacteristic to his own posture and to his teaching which he is giving us. Because almost a quarter of a century ago, he published an essay which he republished later with only minor alterations, in which he said that the person who refuses dialogue is a corrupted person. And he said, the corrupt knows no brotherhood nor friendship, only collaboration. For him, love of the enemy counts for nothing, nor does the distinction between friend and foe which underlies ancient law. He divides humanity, divides all of us, divides everybody around into two categories, collaborator or enemy. If you don't collaborate, if you don't applaud what is being said, you are an enemy, adversary. And you know how to deal with adversaries. Corrupt person. What is the corrupt person? Well, corrupt person does not see his own corruption. The Jorge Maria Bergoglio, later Pope Francis, added, it is the same as with the case of bad breath. The sufferer doesn't notice it. However, others do and should tell him so. He also, Pope Francis, called the corrupt person worse than sin, because sin could be forgiven, but corruption not. Corruption is more odious, more repulsive, and well, deserving penalty than sin. Well, to sum up, there is one emotion which characterizes the behavior of corrupted person. This one emotion is hatred. Hatred as an opposite to love. Love, which great Polish philosopher Henryk Elzenberg beautifully defined as joy of another person's existence. Pure, uninterested joy. Not in order to get some benefit from it, but for the very fact that another human creature is there around, joy derives from that. The person who hates, who does hate is opposite to love, notes another great Polish philosopher, Barbara Skarga. That to others is valuable and important, he sees nothing but duplicity, degeneration, fraud. To them, this appears to be the natural human condition. And unfortunately, it's not translatable easily because Barbara Skarga takes advantage of the Polish word denoting hatred. That Polish word for hatred is nienawiść. But what does it mean, nienawiść? Nienawidzę, that means I don't see you, I ignore you. I don't pay any attention to you. I close my eyes. I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear you. And that is the Polish equivalent, in Polish language, of the idea of hatred. It is an idea of locked, closed tightly windows and look only in the mirror, only surround yourself like very many young people using Facebook today. They create for themselves a comfort zone, a sort of an echo chamber in which they hear only the reflections of their own voice and surround them and sit in a hall of mirror in which they see only reflection of their own face, cutting themselves completely from different views, avoiding discomfort, confusion, and the necessity to look deeply into yourself, which also the internet allegedly opening us this fruit from tree of life, unfortunately present to them unwanted, undesirable, and rejected. Well, I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, there are 3 levels of going the other way, going towards expanding communication, going from series of monologues to a dialogue. The first stage, so to speak, is sociality, as sociologists say, but sociality is only recognition that there are other people around, acceptance of their presence, and therefore engaging in some necessary interchange you can't avoid. On every street of a big city, including Antwerpen, there are people of all different kinds. You cannot for long simply ignore their presence. From there leads a far and difficult road to solidarity. Solidarity which, it goes much beyond mere sociality. Solidarity means readiness to engage in precisely in this process of reconciliation in order to achieve unity. Process of reconciliation in order to achieve unity. That is the substance of the dialogue. And that's why dialogue, being so difficult art, at the same time is indispensable and art which we have to develop and learn as quickly as possible to save our common humanity. I would like to finish, I think I'm approaching 15 minutes, terribly sorry for that, with sharing with you what my sociological colleague Richard Sennett said about the nature, sort of a simplified recipe for a good dialogue. He said that dialogue must be informal, open, and cooperative. What does it mean? Informal, don't set the procedure, the code of proceeding in advance. Don't set the agenda in advance. Leave them to emerge in the course of cooperative conversation. Open means enter the dialogue in double role. Be prepared to be not just the teacher, but also a disciple. You may just learn from somebody else who presents different view, different life experience, and different hierarchy of values. What is worse, you may learn that you have been wrong. You must be prepared for such a turn of conversation where you suddenly realize that what you believe was true was not entirely, and that somebody else living in different place, in different culture, in different tradition, may have a better solution to your shared problems. And finally, cooperative. What does it mean, cooperative? Not like a university seminar when people come in order to prove that I am wise and all of you are stupid. Not this sort of conversation. But cooperative means that there is no division into victors and defeated. From a genuine dialogue, everybody emerges richer than entered. Richer because he learned quite a lot in addition to his own experience. Other people experience, they discussed it, they turned one way and the other, and came to some conclusion. I am fully aware that what I'm telling you now, this recipe, in inverted commas, is very generalistic, and between that and the practice, there is a long road, and not a simple, not a straightforward road to traverse. But I wish you all, with all my heart, that you pass through this road till this very successful end. Thank you.
Amen. Holiness, Beatitude, Eminences, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. I am honored to give the floor now to Mr. Herman Van Rompuy, a great European awarded this year with the Charlemagne Prize, and we congratulate you. And together with Andrea Riccardi, we are blessed in this meeting since we have 2 Charlemagne Prizes. Mr. Van Rompuy is the first President of the European Council. Thank you, Mr. Van Rompuy, for the determination with which you wanted to contribute to this meeting at a delicate moment in the history of Europe and of the world. Please.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Mayor of the great city of Antwerp, Madam Governor of the great province of Antwerp, Mr. Minister, Party President, Eminencies, Excellencies, and I may also say good friends. Belonging to the European Union means first and foremost adhering to fundamental values. Values like human rights, peace, justice, freedom, tolerance, responsibility, solidarity, and friendship. Yes, I did say, and I realize that some of you may be surprised to hear such a word used in the context of politics. But let us remember that the first Franco-German post-war treaty, the treaty concluded by President de Gaulle and Chancellor Adenauer in 1963, was called the Treaty of Friendship. It's all about love, friendship, tolerance, forgiveness, and peace. And it seems to me that the word peace, the value of peace, is what best captures the very essence of the European project, on which we have been toiling since the end of World War II. After all, establishing, maintaining, and developing peace is an ongoing battle, a battle which we must fight on a daily basis. President Mitterrand's saying is still true when he spoke of extreme nationalism, when the nation's glory is put above all else. That kind of nationalism, in his view, means just war. We have to keep this in mind today, looking at the aggression and the death toll in Ukraine. As the Holy Father, Pope Francis, said in June this year, welcoming Shimon Peres and Mahmoud Abbas at the Vatican, and I quote, "Peacemaking calls for courage, much more than warfare. It calls for the courage to say yes to encounter and no to the conflict, yes to dialogue and no to violence, yes to negotiations and no to hostilities, yes to respect for agreements and no to acts of provocation, yes to sincerity and no to duplicity. All of this takes courage. It takes strength and tenacity." Of the quotation. It is even more true than before this tragic summer, with atrocities like the downing of a passenger plane or barbarian acts in Iraq and in Syria. Courage, strength, tenacity, they are the European Union's very raison d'être. For if there is one value which enabled the European Union to endure, it is that of peace. After more than 1,500 years of fratricidal wars, an almost endless list of successively broken peace treaties, and the destruction of Europe, the death of tens of millions of men and women in 2 world wars, it was through forgiveness, reconciliation, and cooperation among and between peoples of Europe that Europe's rebirth was made possible. Robert Schuman symbolically led us into the European Renaissance, the 9th of May 1950. Speaking several months before this declaration, Robert Schuman stated quite clearly that, I'm quoting, "Trust between peoples is neither improvised nor imposed. We can only attain it," he said, "through cooperation within a broader framework in which a number of us show our goodwill. That framework is Europe." Ladies and gentlemen, because Europe is in fact a generous concept, hard to say these days of Euroscepticism, it is a generous concept. It is the practical implementation of forgiveness and reconciliation. This peace cannot be merely be a word. This peace can only be established on the basis of trust, confiance in French, from se fier à, meaning to have faith in, trust. Trust which derives in Europe as elsewhere from reconciliation. Reconciliation which draws on forgiveness, a theological concept which the founding fathers of Europe, the European project, brought to the political sphere. And we have achieved reconciliation after wars of an unprecedented cruelty, a conversion after a Calvary. Reconciliation is therefore at the root of the European togetherness, to use that excellent English word. It implies also that we have made peace with ourselves, for there is no external peace without achieving internal peace. Reconciliation that does not result from forgetting, because nothing lasting is ever constructed on denial of the past. To be reconciled is to accept the past, not in order to understand it or to excuse it, but to go beyond it. That is the only way to establish a lasting peace. Reconciliation is underway also in the Western Balkans. The normalization of relations between Serbia and Kosovo was a precondition for the Serbian candidacy for EU membership. And 2 years ago, remember, we were together in Sarajevo, also for a Sant'Egidio gathering. If it is to be lasting, peace must also be solidly based. For you cannot force peace, and too many failures are caused by a lack of understanding of the original premises. We cannot have permanent peace if we do not live in peace, if we do not eliminate the violence in ourselves. And for this reason, we must establish permanent bonds of peace beginning with our own free will, without deceiving ourselves or others, by showing acts of respect every day, acts of justice and love towards others and towards ourselves. Acts of respect which are just as much acts of peace. We have to bring people together, people who have met each other, got to know each other, start to respect each other. Emmanuel Levinas was right when he spoke about le visage de l'autre and the ethical appeal coming from this encounter. The millions of young people that come together to, for instance, our Erasmus programs, they will never become Euro-negativists of anti-Europeans. They met each other. And to develop peace, peace must be able to count on a profound sense of common destiny and of shared values. And that is where the Union must play its part in full. For if peace is in itself a value of which the ultimate prolongation is love, our Union is not in itself a value, in the sense of an end to be attained. It is only a means, and a very effective one, serving the values of which it is the guarantee, and which at the same time go beyond it. Still today, the European Union never ceases to grow. It does so without spilling a single drop of blood. We started with 6. And now we are with 28, and the story is not over. There is a waiting list. Remember the European flags in Kiev in the winter of this year. And evidence of this new Europe is the election of the Polish Prime Minister as President of the European Council, 25 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the new members attribute to the value of peace in the Union importance which goes beyond that attributed to it by the old members, who have sadly somewhat forgotten the lessons of the past. For the new members, the Cold War only ended in 1989, and for the people of the Western Balkans, civil war and genocide are still sadly living memories. But opus justitiae pax, there is no peace without justice. Societies are now faced with rising poverty, unemployment and growing inequalities. This sentiment paves the way to populism, extremism and anti-European feelings. Europe is considered by many as not sufficiently caring. It is urgent for the Union not to be seen as only benefiting business, but also for the stayers at home. Justice, hate, enemy thinking and racism, which is why we so very much need, and what the consequences are in India, in South America, but is still too high. There, extremists exploit the dispute. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, the European Union is externally in aid. Militarily, it's a fight of civilization against barbarism. The responsibility of each towards themselves and towards what Christians call their neighbors, and that others, Christians sometimes too, call their brothers or simply the traveling stranger. Responsibility and solidarity go hand in hand with rights and duties towards each other. I would like this to be remembered by all those who advocate a withdrawal, those whose heightened selfishness test the Europe to the limit. This selfishness is expressed not only in declining to help others in difficult times, but also in refusing to accept our own responsibilities towards others. Living in peace means living with others, in solidarity and with responsibility. And we felt during the crisis in the Eurozone this interdependence. We are all in the same boat if we want to survive. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, let us hope that in the future, in the Union we may continue to say, to paraphrase Aristide Briand, French minister in the 20s and Nobel Prize winner, and I'm quoting, "I say that Europe is not diminished, nor is it compromised in its strength when, free of all imperialist designs and serving only ideas of progress and humanity, it stands up and declares directly to the world's face, I declare peace on you. Je vous déclare la paix." Thank you.
beautiful harp composition written especially for this peace meeting. Holiness, Beatitude, Eminences, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, our reflection on our commitment to peace 100 years after the First World War is obviously connected to the tense and dramatic situation in the Middle East these days. And the presence of Vian Dakil in our midst is therefore particularly meaningful. As sole representative of the persecuted Yazidi community, one of the persecuted minorities in northern Iraq, she is a member of Iraqi parliament. Your cry for help in parliament went around the world through the social media and was a wake-up call to the world. I warmly welcome you in our midst.
Thank you very much. السيدات والسادة الأفاضل المحترمون، السيدات والسادة في مؤسسة سانتياغو.
Ladies and gentlemen, community of Sant'Egidio, the organizers of this conference, from this wheelchair, I give you the greetings of the children of the Iraqi minorities, together with sadness and incredible pain. You are doubtless aware of what has happened to the children of the minorities in Iraq, starting in the month of August. But you do not know the details of what has happened. The terrible crimes that were committed against a peaceful community, the Yazid community. This community in its religious and social culture knows neither violence nor murder. The Yazid religion was one of the most ancient in Mesopotamia, and its origins go back to the 3rd millennium before Christ. What happened to the Yazids in Sinjar due to the contemporary most dangerous terrorist organization is incompatible with what happens in the 3rd millennium. Dear brothers and sisters, there are 400,000 Yazid migrants who have left their homes, their lands, who live today in Kurdistan. On the streets, there are about 3,000 people who were killed. In part, they were killed by ISIS, and in part, they died of hunger and of thirst in the first days of fleeing on the mountains of Sinjar. About 5,000 people have been kidnapped, men, women, children, families. Hundreds of girls were sold and raped and considered as slaves, and according to ISIS, they have the absolute right to treat them in this manner. Dozens of girls were sold in the markets of Mosul for $150 per girl. 300 girls were sold in Syria, and the cases of violence continue. You know, ladies and gentlemen, that ISIS retreated from the village of Asiba Sheikh Qadr without fighting about 3 weeks ago. Because of the smell of the children of the Yazid religion, men, women and children who had been killed. In the village of Kojo, there was a terrible massacre. ISIS had surrounded a village where approximately 2,000 Yazids live. Some had somehow been able to run away. The others were first forced to choose between Islam and being slaughtered. And no one has intervened. And so this terrorist organization has attacked the village, killed 413 people, men, young people, even 13-year-old boys. The others, men and children, were taken away. And we do not know where they have been taken. No one was expecting that this organization would do all this to the Yazids. The Yazidis. They were all gathered into one of the holy places of the Yazids, and the place was burnt to ashes. The mountain of Sinjar has been through another tragedy, and I was the witness of all this. 25,000 families had sought refuge in the mountains of Sinjar, suffering from the extreme heat, thirst, and hunger. And in the meanwhile, ISIS continued to bomb them with missiles. For 10 days, they lived this tragedy on the mountain. 250 children died, newborn babies, due to the drought, and many people died because they ate the leaves off the trees. Elderly people have died because of hunger, of thirst. Tens and tens of people have died. What has happened in Sinjar? Every tree in Sinjar has seen what had happened, and everyone has cried and wept in front of what has happened. People died of thirst. Young boys, young men and women, the women who were raped and sold to criminals. We Yazidis have been subject to 72 attempts of genocide. And now we have come to number 73. Today I speak of families who have been exterminated, entire families which have been kidnapped, hundreds of children, anyone. We have always been the victim. We have always paid the price, the dearest price, the highest price, because we are different from the majority of the population because of our religious belonging. And so, brothers and sisters, I call upon the international community through this conference, and the people who are present here today, I ask the international community to make a quick decision in order to free more than 5,000 men, women and children who were kidnapped by ISIS, and hundreds of girls that are raped every day. I call upon the international authorities, the Committee for Human Rights of the UN, to start an inquiry on the slaughter and massacre that the Yazidis have been subject to. We demand that the Yazidis who want to seek for asylum in countries of the Western world may be helped, and we ask the international community to create an international protection force in order to stop violence against minorities in Iraq and in all regions where these minorities live, give weapons to the minorities to defend themselves from these terrorists. On behalf of humanity, in the name of humanity, help more than 500,000 refugees that have fled from the Nineveh plains and from Mosul. We ask that peace may be a sign of
that this may be a sign of peace for the future, that we may say no to extremism and hope in the future. Thank you very much. I am a member of the Iraqi Parliament.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Et, chers amis, nous voulons...
Dear friends, for this final part of our opening ceremony, I would like to give the floor to the representatives of the various religions here to have a better understanding of what their contribution can be to the workshop of peace in these troubled times. First of all, I'd like to give the floor to the Syro-Orthodox Patriarch of Antioch and all of the East, His Holiness Ignace Ephraim II. Our prayers are joined by yours to our dear friend Mar Grigoris Ibrahim, whom you worked with. He was a person who took part in many of our meetings. And like Paul Yazigi of the Greek Orthodox Church, these two bishops were abducted in Aleppo over a year ago, and we pray every day for their liberation. Your Holiness, you have the floor.
Distinguished audience, Professor Andrea Riccardi, ladies and gentlemen, allow me first to thank the community of Sant'Egidio for inviting us to this conference. This is indeed an opportune time to hold such a conference dealing with the issues of peace and the future. Today, our world is witnessing tremendous challenges, and our humanity is devastated with many wars and conflicts. Our gathering here in the city of Antwerp is but a reminder to all of us that not much has changed in our human experience. It was in 1914, exactly a century ago, that this beautiful city was under siege as part of the clash of nations over the control of the resources of our earth. Therefore, the quest for real peace becomes the most pressing priority which should be understood by all. I bring you greetings of millions of Christians and non-Christians in the Middle East. The voices of Sunnis that are killed by Sunnis, Shia that are targeted by Islamic fanatics, Christians and Yazidis that were expelled from their homes and towns, children that have lost their parents, and millions of people who desire to live in peace with each other. But international politics and religious fanaticism prevent them from doing so. The gravity of the events that are taking place in the world in general, and in the Middle East in particular, is beyond all which we have seen or heard of in the past. History is not even equipped with the appropriate terminology to accurately describe what we are witnessing. The aspirations of the peoples of the Middle East to live in peace and prosperity have been shattered. The smaller religious communities are especially affected by these tragic events. What kind of future awaits these communities? How can young people fulfill their dreams? Will there be any future for them in their own homeland? Peace is the future. Without peace, there will be no future for our humanity. Without peace, humanity is in misery and it will collapse under the heavy weight of massacres and genocides. Peace creates harmony between different races and proves the possibility of life in mutual understanding and despite all differences. While peace is a requirement for a free life, for Christians, it's a way of life. Christ is the Prince of Peace, who calls the peacemakers as being the children of God. Moreover, for Christians, true peace is that which is given by our Lord Jesus Christ. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. The peace of Christ is given to us in the midst of turmoil and chaos. It's a peace that cannot be taken away from us. It's the everlasting peace everyone is searching for. The real challenge is to relay this concept of peace to a family living in the middle of a war zone. In so doing, you will come to realize how this divine peace is foreign to this world. Very few are those who, totally submitting to God's will and simply believing that the Lord is a source of peace in our troubled world, will be able to fully grasp and accept this. Allow us to share with you some of what we have observed during our recent visits to our suffering people in different countries in the Middle East. It will give you an authentic picture of the conditions under which Christians and others are living now. It remains up to you to imagine what peace means for these people. We visited twice our people in Iraq who are suffering from persecution and expulsion. The first time we went to northern Iraq from June 13 to 16 of this year and visited the more than 15,000 people who were expelled from their homes in the city of Mosul by ISIS Daesh. They took refuge in the towns and villages of the Nineveh Plain, thinking that they are in safety. And then our second visit took place on August 20th to 25th of this year, together with a delegation of the patriarchs of the East. We visited these same individuals who were expelled for the second time in a few weeks. This time, with them, there were more than 120,000 Christians and many other minorities were all driven away from their homes in the towns and villages of the Nineveh Plains into the region of Kurdistan. During that visit, we arrived in the village of Aradan, a Christian village, where some 50 families have taken refuge in the local church. While meeting with these people in the church hall, a 3-year-old child approaches me with his twin brother. He widely opens his eyes and his arms and instantly says in Syriac Aramaic, "Leitlan Duktha, Leitlan Duktha." We have no place, we have no space. They were living with more than 70 people in this small, tiny church hall. They did not have a place in that crowded, small hall. Yet these two boys were luckier than many other children who are still sleeping under tents on the streets and inside unfinished construction sites. During each visit, we have observed that Christians still held hope in the power and the mercy of the Lord. His power that will lead them out of their present misery, and his mercy that will move him to save them. In each visit, we have spoken to the displaced Christians. We wanted to assure them that it is not too late, that there is still hope to find a solution. We have addressed the politicians locally and internationally, asking them to provide these people with international protection. We have written to the UN Secretary General, the Security Council members, the European Union, the UN Human Rights Commission. We have also motivated the Lebanese government to report to the International Criminal Court and ask them to investigate these evil acts, which constitute nothing less than crimes against humanity. Peaceful solution for these suffering refugees ought to result in their return to their homes in the Nineveh Plain and the city of Mosul. It should also help them defend themselves against future attacks. The situation in Lebanon is also very worrying. Sectarianism is in control of the political life in the country. Division is established and schism between the different constituents of the Lebanese society is growing beyond manageable. ISIS, Al-Nusra Front, and other terroristic armed groups are having stronghold on several Lebanese towns and villages. The small town of Arsal, which lies on the Qalamon mountainous region on the Syrian-Lebanese border, continues to present a big challenge to the government of Lebanon. Some 30 Lebanese soldiers are being held hostages by these terrorist groups, and every now and then a soldier would be slain. In Lebanon, unity is most needed. In fact, it is the only element that can bring peace into the complexity of confessional groups. Unity of will to build together the future for the young citizens, to help elect a new president for that country. As the crisis in Syria was unfolding, we came to realize that the war benefited no one, although there were some legitimate calls and need for political reforms. These did not justify at all the barbaric acts of kidnapping, beheading, killing, and destroying everything. Even old trees were uprooted and burned. Monuments were destroyed and statues were beheaded. Syrian people in general became victims of this senseless war. While Christians were not specifically targeted for their religion, they took more than their share of suffering and martyrdom. Sadad is an exclusively Syriac Christian town of about 15,000 inhabitants in the region of Homs. Sadad was attacked by Al-Nusra Front and other groups October of last year. In one day, 45 people were killed, and during my last visit to Sadad, I had to look into the eyes of a father who lost his wife, his 2 children, his uncle, and his mother-in-law, together with 2 other members of his family. They were all killed and thrown into a well. How can we speak of peace with this heartbroken father? Today, more than 4 million Syrians are living on the handouts from the International Food Programme and other humanitarian organizations in a country that was self-sufficient and debt-free for many decades. Distinguished audience, the 2 archbishops have already been mentioned. It's now more than 500 days since the abduction of Mar Gregorios Yohanna Ibrahim and Archbishop Boulos Yazigi of Aleppo. And we are still to learn about their whereabouts and their conditions. These are 2 men of God who were on their way back from a mission to rescue 2 kidnapped clergy members. When they were abducted, isn't the international community ashamed of its silence about the abduction of these two prominent figures and the other innocent people? When is the world going to listen and learn? Here in Belgium, we are commemorating the centennial of the First World War. Shortly after the start of that war, genocide was committed against Christians in the former Ottoman Empire. Together with some 1.5 million Armenians, more than 500,000 of our Syriac-speaking people were killed. These were targeted simply because they were Christians. And that reminds us that man can be monstrous and act in an outrageous way. We in the Syriac Orthodox Church of Antioch are planning a year-long commemoration of the Syriac genocide, SAIFO, in order to remind ourselves and others that the world should be united against terrorism and against the spread of hatred and extremism which threatens the basic rights of people. God created the world in order to exist in peace and harmony. Human beings ought to be the agents of such peace. Sustainable peace is not merely the absence of war and violence. It's rather the result of a healthy relationship with our Creator. It is then reflected in our relationship with each other and with the world, with nature in which we live. Therefore, building a culture of peace should be a common goal for all of us in order to prepare a better future for generations to come. In so doing, we need to draw on lessons learned from our past experiences. World wars, genocides, and religious and ethnic cleansings are shameful stains in the history of our human race. It is our and every generation's responsibility, therefore, to promote true peace. Brothers and sisters, the explosive situation in the Middle East, including the recent violence in Gaza, is heartbreaking, yet hope for peace and optimism that a bright day is near still exists in the hearts of people. And we take this opportunity to call upon all people of goodwill to work together towards promoting such peace in the world, mindful of the importance of religion in the public life. We believe that our role as religious leaders in spreading a culture of understanding, accepting of one another, is paramount. Hence, the efforts of the community of Sant'Egidio are greatly appreciated. Organizing events and conferences such as this one, which promotes the spirit of tolerance and peaceful coexistence, will surely bear fruits for our broken humanity. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Holiness. And once again, thank you for being among us. It's really a great honor for us to have you in our midst these days. Now we are glad to listen to the Jewish contribution to this panel through Rabbi Abraham Skorka from Argentina. The world came to know you as Pope Francis' friend. We are happy to welcome you in our midst. The floor is yours.
Buenas tardes a todos.
Good evening to everyone. Authorities, Professor Ricard. I shall speak in the language I used to speak about peace with then Cardinal Bergoglio, the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. Through a very profound dialogue, through which we were seeking paths that could contribute to giving, to helping make a step forward to create a better reality, that better reality we call peace. It is very hard to speak after the witnesses that we have, the testimonies that we have heard, testimonies that really tear the heart, heart-rending. What I can do is meditate together with you on the message, the biblical message of the Jewish Bible, the basis and the inspiration of the Abrahamic religions, to understand how the Bible gives us an answer on who man is and why, ultimately, and how ultimately we can achieve dialogue, deepen, analyze, and increase the knowledge of oneself, the knowledge of our neighbor. We shall be able to do so the more we have a clear idea of who we are, of our human condition. Therefore, as a Jew, and as a son of the religion of Abraham, which we share with Islam and with Christianity, when we seek a guidance, when we search for a guidance that can tell us, and man, who are you? We seek for answers in those holy Jewish texts. A careful reading, then, of the Jewish Bible allows us to understand that man is recognized as a being full of conflicts which has as its objective to resolve them. Thus, the fifth commandment, to honor one's parents, refers to the conflicting relationship we have with them and which we must overcome. Indeed, if it were so easy, it would not require a special call from the Creator to underline the respect that is due to one's parents. The same must be said concerning the relationship of man with his Creator. On one side, he orders us to rule over nature. On the other, he tells us to remember, as he told Abraham, that we are dust. And as we read in Genesis chapter 18, verse 27, in Psalm 8, it is clearly stated that there is a paradox in the human existence. If I look at your heaven, of your fingers, the psalm says, moon and stars that you have created, what is man for you to take care of him, to look after him? God, what is man for you to remember him, and the Son of Man for you to look after him? Nevertheless, you have made him little less than angels, and you have crowned him with glory and honor. Man, according to the vision of the psalmist, must find balance between his greatness, which is particular among all the creatures created by God, and his insignificance in front of the Creator. To know that one is great, but at the same time maintain the humbleness and sincere simplicity on the other. At the same time, we are in conflict with our neighbor, and as peoples, one against the other. The struggle for survival, jealousies, avidity, are factors that lead to being irritable and to worsening situations between individuals and peoples. The biblical proposal refers us to struggle with our passions in order to solve our conflicts at an individual level and at a collective level, choosing the option which is capable of giving dignity to life, one's own life and life of one's neighbor. The challenge of man, according to the Bible, is to develop his spiritual and intellectual capabilities in order to solve all his conflicts, reaching a state of balance with his being, with his family environment, with his neighbor, with the societies, and societies with each other, in order to find a balance with God. This balance in Hebrew is called shalom, which is translated as peace, but its root is shalom, the same as the term shalem, which means complete, which means full. In the story of Jacob in Genesis 33:18, we read that once he returned to Canaan, having solved his situation of conflict with his father-in-law and overcoming the profound enmity and hatred with his brother, he arrived at Shalem, complete, to the city of Shechem, as the Midrash and many exegetes interprets. The word Shalem there means complete. We meet this in many verses of the book of Kings, as well as in other biblical texts. We meet the expression to have the heart complete with God, one complete with God, as well as to honor God with a Shalem heart, with a complete heart. Therefore, in the biblical lexicon, God and his rules and his laws are honored when one acts with completeness, with integrity, and this is a condition which grants peace or shalom to the individual. A man who does not solve his conflicts is fragmented, and only a man who struggles with his instincts and his pulsions of death and destruction can reach a complete and integrated heart. In the text of the Deuteronomy, there is a desperate cry of the teacher to his disciples, of Moses to his people, the people of Israel, just before his farewell and his death. Today I have witnesses against you, the heaven and earth. I have placed before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. End of quote. The ultimate aim of all the rules that God gives to the people of Israel is to perfect its heart so that each of its members may be capable of choosing a path of life in his or her existence. The verse that defines the credo in the Jewish Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, is the one that refers to the uniqueness of God in Deuteronomy 6:4, when it is said, "Listen, Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is only one." Many exegeses have been proposed of this verse, and starting from the vision of Abraham Joshua Heschel, that the Bible, rather than a theology written by God, is an anthropology written by God, I ask myself, what does this verse teach to man? What implications does it have for his life? This uniqueness of his creator, what consequences does it have in the life of man? The answer I find is that Bible teaches to the human being that he must imitate God, as the verse in the book of Leviticus says, "Be holy, for I, your God, am holy." And at the same time, one can deduce that as he is one, man must try and strive to be one, integrated and complete through the resolution of his conflicts. In the book of Numbers, chapter 15, God requires the people of Israel to place pieces of strings at the end of of their dresses, with a blue string at the end, so that the Jew, seeing them, will not follow what his eyes seem and prostitute himself, but rather call him to follow the rules he must follow. One of the wise men of the Talmud said that the fulfilling of this single rule equals to fulfilling all the rules of the Torah. Indeed, these strings speak of the struggle that one must fight against negative impulses, and the importance of overcoming them in order to solving through life peace and to reaching peace through one's life, solving the existential conflicts and reaching a complete heart. This is not an easy struggle. One can find it, and the story of this can be found in the story of the Garden of Eden, when the snake tempts man and his wife. You would become like God, he says, being aware and knowing and understanding good and evil. The first man is incapable of resisting this temptation, that of believing he is God, and he falls to it, just as all those whom with a feeling of selfish almightiness have continued upon this path, sowing death. In the book of Numbers, chapter 6, there is a formula with which the priests used to call upon God's blessing for the people of Israel. And it says, I quote, "The Lord bless you and protect you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be goodly towards you. The Lord turn his face to you and grant you peace." It is one of the few prayers with a formulation which appears in the Torah. The climax of it is peace. Peace is what God recognizes as the hardest goal to reach in human condition. That is peace. Therefore, he offers it as the final climax that the priests pronounce in order to bless the people. What we translate as peace, which appears in the verse, is the Hebrew word that we have mentioned, shalom. According to Isaiah chapter 2 and Micaiah chapter 4, in the eras to follow, and I mean by this all the exegetes that followed, the universal history will end when humanity will have acquired the capability to live in this philosophical conception. All faiths beyond the faith that they put in their vision of God, or nature, man, all faiths that consider justice, mercy, and the special consideration that every individual deserves because he is such, for all of them, love as values upon which all the acts of existence must be built, those religions truly operate for peace, and it is one of their greatest contributions for the good of humanity. They are fulfilling, they are responding to a divine commandment. They are helping God in his constant work of creation concerning the human condition on earth. But those who have an Abrahamic faith in one transcendent God interpret the scripture fanatically, believing they are the sole detainers of a correct understanding of it, and believe they have the right to subject all those who do not coincide with their visions, those empty their faith of its authentic meaning, transforming it into a rough paganism. Peace is the sublime state one must aspire to, and which all men tenaciously must work for. Though its final realization depends on God's will, it is humankind's challenge in all eras to build a reality that forces the very Creator to bless his creatures with peace, just as he establishes it and continues to do so in the highest of heavens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Dear friends, now we proceed with the contribution from the Islamic religion with the authoritative voice of the great Mufti from Egypt, Shawki Ibrahim Abdel Karim Alam. With great interest and concern, we have followed the events which in recent years have shaken your beautiful and beloved country of Egypt. And we share the concern for the future of the Arabic world. The floor is yours.
Thank you. In the name of Allah, the Merciful, ladies and gentlemen, I greet you with the greeting of Islam, which is peace. May the peace and the blessings of God be with you all. First of all, allow me to express my heartfelt thanks and deep appreciation for this generous invitation and for giving me the opportunity to meet with you all to discuss our shared religious traditions and values and how they can enhance world peace. And I hope that this event will prove to be informative and pragmatic and serve humanity at large. Islam established a moral and humanistic civilization that encompassed a plurality of religions, philosophies, and civilizations, which contributed immensely to the Muslim civilization. And the media simply promoted these views. The source of the alleged justification for much of the extremism and political violence across the Muslim world and beyond cannot and should never be attributed to religious values and beliefs, but rather to a complex set of factors which need to be understood so that these phenomena, which are a threat to the entire world, can be eradicated. Now, let me be clear and reiterate that Islam is against extremism. It has always been against extremism. But if we do not understand the factors that provide a rationalization for terrorism and violence, we will never be able to eradicate the scourge. And therefore, in order to build a better future and to bring about an end to this extreme crisis, we have to remember the initiative of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz, who wants to establish a center under the umbrella of the United Nations to combat terrorism. We have welcomed this initiative, and we have contributed with our scholarly expertise through the Mufti of Egypt for the success of this important initiative. Building a world of the sort, I imagine, requires the participation of leaders of all communities, both religious and otherwise, to express their faith and trust in their Muslim counterparts. And there will be no progress until we work together in faith and trust. There is no more powerful weapon against all sorts of extremism than the right education. And may the peace and mercy of Allah be with all of you.
Thank you very much. And as a final contribution of the religions to the work for peace, we shall now listen to the voice of Buddhism through Gyun Sujitani, Supreme Advisor of Tendai Buddhist denomination, coming from the far Japan. The floor is yours.
The pilgrimage that started in 1986 from the holy city of Assisi in Italy reached Antwerpen in Belgium this year, and I feel particularly honored for the opportunity that was given to me to say a few words of greeting to this opening ceremony, where leaders from the world religions have gathered together with important personalities and political leaders, including prime ministers, mayors, and other authoritative representatives. I feel a particular gratitude, and I wish to express my appreciation for the president of this assembly and to the personalities that have gathered here together. This year, it goes without mentioning, is the 100th anniversary of World War I, known as the most terrifying war which was experienced by mankind up to then. During the war that lasted 4 years, 37 million people died, and the number of victims and the amount of ruin was impossible to calculate. This happened because, compared to previous conflicts which took place especially primarily in Europe, the area involved grew and involved Africa, Middle East, Eastern Asia, and areas of the Pacific. Certain weapons, such as those of mass destruction, were introduced for the first time in World War I. Novelties were not only in these aspects, but we must say that up to then, wars were fought by professional soldiers. This situation changed with World War I, which was total war, that involved not only soldiers but also civilians, who ended up being employed in the war industries and factories with the complete involvement of entire nations. Thus, the boundary between fighting forces and non-fighting forces was vague, with the result that the number of victims increased. A definition of this war as the war that puts an end to all wars and it was born from the League of Nations. The League of Nations itself was born from the dust, from ashes of World War I, with the objective to prevent that in the future there would be similar wars. In spite of that, 20 years later, a new world war that caused consequences even greater than that of the first, with an estimated number of victims between 50 and 80 million. The weapons of mass destruction have become even more sophisticated. Chemical weapons, biological warfare, and finally, the atomic bomb, such as called the ultimate weapon. Bombs which were thrown on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In 1945, in order to establish international cooperation, the UN were born in order to overcome the failure of the League of Nations. At its beginning, it only had 51 nations, it included 51 nations, but currently they are 193. This result should be the fruit of globalization, of the strengthening of a mutual connection on a global level. But it could also be seen as a result that it comes not from unification, but from separations, from the birth of new nations that achieved independence, or of states that separated and where before different ethnic groups coexisted. In spite of the fact that humanity has experienced 2 terrible world wars, it has been through also a time of Cold War, where countries which were allied in the Second World War, and local conflicts called proxy wars. On one side, globalization has forced everyone to be aware of the diversity that is present, but on the other side, contrasts and antagonism has borne. To the point that we could think that the history of humanity can be called the history of war. And what surprises is that in the 20th century, 80% of the people who were killed in wars were soldiers, and while 10% were civilians. But today, and starting at the relationship is opposite and 8-to-1. In the contemporary world, it is not exaggerated to say that civilians are the first victims of every conflict. In other terms, this modern society has a characteristic, according to which civilians will be subject to the consequences of every war, becoming its victims. And all of us, 100 years after World War I, we must recognize this and acknowledge it. This awareness entails the necessity that us all, facing wars all over the world, should not look at them as if they were problems of faraway countries, whose fires do not reach us. Rather, we should feel a strong awareness that we are the ones who have to work so that no war may begin in any part of the world. An open workshop where everyone can work and where everyday peace is built. The ACNUR Charter says mutual misunderstanding among peoples has always been, in the course of history, the origin of suspicion and distrust among nations whose consequence has been war. Therefore, religious who wish and want peace on this earth, overcoming every religious barrier, have sought to carry on interreligious dialogue, to establish mutual understanding, offering also to the citizens the opportunity to take part in this open workshop. And at the historical meeting of Assisi in 1986, which was summoned and called by John Paul II, His Holiness, we together with the leaders of the great world religions, Christian, Muslims and Buddhists, up to the representatives of the ethnic Asian, African and American religions, sharing a space of equal dignity, prayed together for peace. The task to carry on this spirit was given to the community of Sant'Egidio, which year after year in different European places organizes meetings of interreligious dialogue, offering many citizens the chance to take part in this open workshop of peace. Even in Asia, the spirit of Assisi is carried on, because in 1986 at Holy Mount Hiei, in the suburbs of the ancient city of Kyoto, there was a World Religious Summit where religions prayed for peace. This meeting is held every year on the 4th of August, and that is where children, who will be the future of the world, are taught the importance of working for peace. On these occasions, we call to everyone, wishing that the meetings of prayer for peace may be repeated all over the world, crossing differences of races and religion. In addition to the meeting of the WCRP, which was established in 1970, there is a kind of workshop which is open to all citizens through the method of dialogue and interreligious cooperation. I mention one example. We have organized the campaign Arms Down, which lasted 2 years, starting in 2009, carried on principally by the youth group. It was a campaign of signature collection in favor of the abolition of nuclear weapons and the reduction of armaments and nuclear warfare, attaining and to favor the achievement of the MDGs of the United Nations. On the 4th of October 2011, in the list of 20 million signatures, 20,102,746 signatures were collected, including 10 million signatures collected by the Japanese group, were given to the International Youth Council of the WCRP. In this way, the religions, which are more and more connected to each other, will have a clear awareness that there are ambits of action which could be worked upon together. In the past, the ancient Greek called other peoples foreigners barbaros, and in India these peoples were known as mlekas. In both cases, we are speaking of barbarous people that speak and misunderstand a language which is impossible to understand. This does not only happen in ancient times, but we too tend to despise or ignore those who have thoughts which are different from our own. War indeed starts in the heart of man, as the UNESCO Charter says. And in the heart of man, the seeds of peace must be sown. It is necessary, in order to build peace, to educate people who are tolerant with regard to other cultures. We must build this benchmark of this fortress of peace in the human heart, since every man's childhood, providing an education of peace. Children who were often beaten, as pedagogist Dorothy Lonorti used to say, when they grow up, they learn to trust in strength. Young people who are always criticated learn to criticize. Young people who have learned to tolerate learn patience. Young people who have learned friendship learn to be kind. Somehow, we are like pulling a huge vehicle up a mountain. If they don't agree, or if there is no harmony among them, they will not be able to push that vehicle upwards. Therefore, I wish to exhort each other, let us gather our strength to bring and carry up the vehicle of peace.
A warm thank you to all the speakers for their ample contributions to make us reflect and to support our will to make peace in our time. I thank the audience for its attention and its interest, and I thank also the hundreds of people following this interesting opening session outside of this room in front on the square. I invite everyone to explore in depth the themes of their choice the coming days within the highly interesting program of roundtables taking place at a walking distance within the city center of Antwerp and which are open to the public. The more we ponder on the 100th anniversary of the outbreak of the First World War and the too many conflicts and wars going on today, the more we understand that we need to build with courage and conviction, everyone according to its own capacity, peace. May these days of peace is the future strengthen us for that. Thank you all.
So you speak Spanish as well?